creations represent, um, to represent a title, an idea, an organization, and we take it for granted that those mean things to other people, but they don't always. And I know there's some that come up. All right, for the sake of recording, I am going to start again now that I'm in the right place and have all the pieces together. So, frequently asked questions is something I feel I am qualified to speak to, because it's all about me. I won't really tell you all about me, but I am a speech language pathologist. So I'm interested in communication, understanding, and using language, clear speech, using language in interactions between people, and how communication affects all those other areas of development, like behavior and developing relationships. So I've been doing this for a good number of years. I'm usually hesitant to say how many out loud because it makes me feel really old. But over the years, I've collected lots of notes from meetings, other presentations like this, um, wonderful PD sessions that I've been part of. And then that gave me the basis for putting this presentation together. I divided up the questions or comments into categories. We have our Wheel of Wonder, which is some of those broader ideas or questions that have come up repeatedly. The definition dice, because I know there's some words that really are great for describing things in speech language or early intervention, make lots of sense to me, but aren't necessarily transparent to everyone else. And so I think it's really beneficial for everyone to have those clearly defined, and then cracking into them. Those little combinations of letters that mean something to people who are really familiar with them, but unless you've had it broken down and had a chance to see it in context, they might not be as meaningful to other people. The reason I have organized it in this way as well is to gamify it a little bit, to take the content in a way and make it a little bit more playful. And also, in lieu of brave volunteers willing to ask questions, I've got some devices to help generate those for me. And besides being beneficial to me in this context, because it's going to help with my pacing and make sure I don't talk for 3 hours on speech and language, because I really do enjoy this topic. The benefits of making things a game or making things playful is that it gets more engagement. So we're getting more connection. Maybe the visual part would help to attract and sustain attention. Maybe the little bit of unexpectedness and novelty will help to both create some engagement as well as to make it more memorable. And then there's a little bit of intermittent reinforcement too. If the thing you're thinking about, the thing you're looking forward to comes up, or, you're really hoping for a particular color, or you just have some other internal game going on, it can be reinforced, but not consistently. And that intermittent reinforcement is going to be what really hooks someone in and helps them to persist. So with the Wheel of Wonder, we'll give it a spin. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I give that one a spin. The first question actually is something that does tend to come up a lot. What is severe, or what does severe mean? What does it mean when I see that on a report in a diagnosis or perhaps on the IPP? And I know that it is something that can sound harsh at first. Severe is severe, that it is significant. Um, but in the realms of speech and language and early intervention, I wouldn't say it has a negative connotation. It's neutral. It is just a representation of the intensity of a delay, the amount of delay relative to typical development. And particularly with early childhood, we know that this is a time of immense change for individuals. And we expect that children are going to change, and especially with support. So, kids who are in programming who have wonderful parents who have advocated for them and taken the steps to get them involved with early intervention, those kids have an even better chance of making progress. So, even though we're looking at severe right now, that doesn't mean that it's forever. It doesn't mean that um, we don't see all that potential for change and that we do expect it. I'll just say, as a corollary to that, too, there is often we'll talk about mild moderate, or you'll see MM. That is, again, looking at that degree of delay, whether it's in the mild range, so just like it sounds, a smaller amount, a less deviation from what we would expect from typical development. Moderate would be somewhere in the middle, where we're seeing some significant delays, but it's not severe, but it's a little more than mild. The other thing you might see when we're looking at that um, categorizing of development in terms of uh, delay is age appropriate. So those are, when we reach the range where we expect kids to be for their age, we would probably call that age appropriate. Next question is going to be, oh, see now, if I was right on the line, how can I help my child to follow directions? This, excuse me, is something that comes up very often at home, but it's something we see in the school setting as well. It is really, there's so much about school that is about following the group plan, not just by individual ideas or intents. And so there's often some instruction to help everyone to be on that same page and to move with the direction. And then there can also be a lot of directions involved in any particular task, the steps involved, and then also directions to help individuals to navigate through the day and manage some of their behavior or other choices. So, with following directions, the first thing we want to do is to be fair. We really want to make sure we have the child's attention before giving the direction. If you're just speaking out into the universe without ensuring that attention first, it can add to your frustration because you feel like you're saying it over and over again. But if the child is an active recipient, right away, your chance of success is going to be very low. So we can do things like being sure that we are at the child's level, and that can be literally in terms of trying to be more eye to eye, face to face. It also means we're using an appropriate language level. So not too many words, but not oversimplified, picking words that we know the child understands and are meaningful to them. And using a child's name is really a great way to help to get their attention and get them engaged. But it's still a skill that some kids are working on. It is a learned skill. So that might be a place to start. Even if they don't have that skill, that might be a place to start even before expecting some of those directions. Once you've got their attention, we want to think about whether we're using directions as a functional thing. And so we want kids, in that case, we want kids to be successful. So we want to make sure that we're working at their level of development. So if they're just able to do one-step directions, we stick with one steps. If they're starting to build on being able to put two-step directions, two steps are appropriate. Typically, I would say for this age, I'm not putting more than two together. At most, I would do three steps together. But even then, I'm probably providing some extra support, or I'm choosing students for whom I know that's really a skill that they have well developed. One of the things to consider when you're thinking about that chunking and just putting one direction together, it's easy to think of the number of steps. Do this and then that, or do this and then that, and then the other thing. But it's also important to think about the complexity of, so if you're using some concepts, and that can be about any number of things, it adds to the complexity of the direction. And so not all directions are created equivalent. You can say, pick up the water bottle, or pick up the blue water bottle that's in the fridge and put it in the bag beside the door. Both are sort of one action, but obviously the second one has a lot more concepts in terms of, we're looking for particular color of water bottle, and we're looking for one that is in a particular place. So we need to know the colors concepts. We have to have position concepts. We have to have all the vocabulary for, the home in terms of the fridge and the door, and you have to understand the preposition beside. So there's always going to be maybe a little bit of detective work involved where it might be breaking down. If we want kids to get to that point where they're doing those more complex directions, but where do we have to put the support in? Maybe we need to work on helping them to understand the difference between beside and under and behind. Maybe we're working on some common household vocabulary, or maybe we're just working on being able to put those things together and saying it to yourself and then acting on it. Which is another good strategy I suggest to parents when it comes to following directions, is modeling that self-talk, repeating it to yourself as you complete the direction, and really encouraging kids to do that too. And I'll even do that overtly. So tell me what I said, or tell me what you're going to do. And that saying it out loud is a precursor to them being able to say it over in their mind on their own, and it helps to give them that example. I always say too, if it's something really novel, really new, you might need to familiarize a little bit first too. So whether it's with some materials that are new, which is great for that excitement, interest, and engagement, or whether it's a task that just might feel a really, really new and so uncomfortable, giving kids some familiarization, showing them, labeling, even demonstrating can help to reduce some of the other cognitive loads and help them to be more successful. And the last thing that always comes up with following directions is, again, along the idea of detective work and really being sure whether there isn't a choice component. Is my child not following the direction because they just don't want to? Or even more than that, they're more focused on something else? Or is it because of a processing challenge? All right, next question. What does modeling mean? This is a really good question, and it's something that I took for granted for too long, because this is a word I use a whole lot. Because modeling, I think, is one of the most valuable and most natural strategies we can use, because it's using ourselves as an example. So we are demonstrating the skill we want the child to use. So we're using the word, we're emphasizing the sound, or it could even be it another type of skill like a fine motor skill, gross motor skill, any type of skill, we can, as the adult, be the model, the example. This means that you can, because you always got yourself with you, you can work some natural reinforcement in just about anywhere, anytime. What it does require, though, is that little bit of awareness. So knowing where your child's development is, knowing what you want to try and target to emphasize, and knowing or thinking ahead of some opportunities where you can put in chances to do that modeling and finding ways to increase the number of opportunities. So you're finding ways to work in as many repetitions as possible. With modeling, uh, keeping a slow but steady rate of speech is important. I know it's so hard, as you can see from this presentation or any other one I've done. Naturally, as adults, we do speak quickly, especially when it's something we're excited about, or especially if there's any type of emotion involved. So when we say slow speech, or when I say slow speech, I'm not really talking about a really long, drawn out snail's pace, but I am thinking of a slower rate of speech than I would use typically. But I still want it to retain the intonation of natural speech. We don't want a robot's voice. We don't want to sound really choppy or really monotone. We want still speech to sound natural. We can, though, I think, stretch naturalness just a little bit in terms of drawing attention to those keywords or sounds by saying them just a little bit louder, or with a bit more stress, using our facial expression, maybe even working in some gestures, possibly even a visual cue to go along. And that just, any way we can add to the way kids are getting the information in, so not just hearing it, but seeing it and through all the nonverbal communication, is going to help it be more effective. It's going to be more meaningful and more memorable. Back to the wheel. How are communication and behavior connected? I did have to change some of my questions on the wheel because it doesn't allow me to write as much as I want. But when it comes to communication and behavior, I always like to say communication is everything. And partly that's my bias because I love speech and language and communication. And I really do think it's what makes us human. It's really integral to who we are. Uh, but everything is communication, I think, is true as well. I think that for the most part, it is true that behavior is trying to tell us something. I think sometimes children can be so dysregulated that they might not even be aware of what they're trying to tell us. It can sometimes get kind of lost, but overall, I think behavior has a purpose, and that purpose is to tell us something. So that's how one of the ways that communication and behavior are connected. It's just trying to do that detective work again, figure out what do we think the behavior is trying to tell us, because that gives us such a better idea of how we want to address it, what we can replace it with, what other skills we can be teaching, what we can do to be proactive. I think it's also really important to think about communication, not just in terms of words or sounds, but also to think of how it is a tool between people, how it is the way we navigate through our worlds where we're sharing space with other people, which is most of the time. Social communication is about language and interactions. And that is when a lot of those challenges with behavior come up. So again, teaching some of those social communication skills in a more overt way might help to be proactive in setting the kids up for better interactions and less of the challenges that lead to the behaviors that are not wanted. Also, language strategies can be very meaningful when we're supporting behavior. So, remembering, first of all, to minimize language in times of high emotion is really important, and allowing wait time is really important. Two key language enhancement strategies. We also always want to be mindful of the appropriate language level to use and the key vocabulary that's going to be meaningful for a kid. And then we can use language support such as visuals, social stories, or rote phrases or scripts that can help children to make behavior choices that are more effective. What to do when you simply cannot understand your child? That does come up very often, and it's one of those heartbreaking things, because we it happens to me too. So I understand, how that feels as the adult, and also I think I have some understanding of how the kid is feeling, and it is really, a really tough situation, and it does happen, but, it is not hopeless. Um I think staying engaged, just sticking with the interaction, really staying calm and letting the kiddo know that you're there with them and you're open to working through this is really foundational. I think that's one of the most important but basic things we can do. One of the things I suggest also is that we shift that perception of the responsibility to the adult so that the kiddo feels less frustrated. I don't want them to feel like it's their problem. They can't say it right. They can't find the right word. It's I try and bring that responsibility onto myself as the other partner that I am having trouble understanding. I can't hear it quite right. I am not, I need more time to figure it out. My ears are having trouble. Those kind of things that help, again, just take some of that pressure off the child and make them hopefully not feel as intense emotion about it, and also reinforces the idea that this is a partnership. Communication is a back and forth. It takes both sides. Helping your child to calm and helping them to use a more slow, steady rate of speech can help with the breakdown. Um, Usually, we see this more when kids are trying to say more. So they're giving us some long strings of language, but we're really having trouble picking out particular words. So trying to break out one chunk of that can help make it, if you could get that one piece to hold on to, it can help to start to build all the understanding together. So I'll even say to kids, "Oh, like, can you just tell me one part?" Or if you can make your best guess using the context of what's going on, of what you know about the kid, to ask some questions. So you're asking, are you telling me about your cat or your brother? Something to help narrow it down. Sometimes it might even have to come down to a no question like, "Oh, are you telling me about what that friend did? No. Are you telling me about that toy?" Those kind of things. And again, help to sort of narrow in. So, because when you have context, it makes it so much easier to decipher what kids are saying. And then once we start to get those best guesses, we can start to build on it. Depending on the child and the situation, sometimes being really silly or nonsensical can help to elicit a response while diffusing some of that frustration. So, um, if you went to my colleague Janet Gallagher's lovely presentation regarding communication temptations. One of the strategies that's a communication temptation is called creative stupidity. So that's when we know what it's not, but we're going to say something like that that's really outrageous, that's going to get a reaction, and that might get that really clear yes or no narrowed down. It might get a single word response that'll help you to, again, start to build. Always encouraging the nonverbal language, the facial expression, gestures. And sometimes we have to take it to that further step of asking the child to point, to guide us to a spot, to show or lead. And sometimes we need to take a break too. So then it's like acknowledging and apologizing and saying we'll try again. Sometimes kids don't want to try again though, and we have to respect that. Oh, we've covered that. Oh, how do I help my child say R, as in row or ear or Roger? And I got to confess, this is a bit of a trick question because it does come up a lot. And often I'll say, well, we want to be careful with that because if we're talking about our preschoolers or even our kindergartners, with typical R development, it might just be emerging or not even until 5 to 8 years of age. So the age range where that sound is typically clear and accurate is older than our kinders and pre-kindergarten students. And since it's a later developing sound, it's not something we would consider necessarily an error or a delay for a child who is 3 or 4 or just, a fairly new vibe coming, or even 6. So we want to be sensitive to that. We can always model, providing those strong, clear, frequent examples. And the sound may be emerging and we want to take advantage of that. But really think of it not as correcting, but as providing exposure and experience and a great auditory model. So they've got a strong foundation. And so that as their personal development readiness emerges, the sound should be acquired more easily. But we don't want to frustrate kids by asking them to practice something that isn't developmentally appropriate and that they might not be ready for. So we just want to watch how we approach that and what the expectations are. If we are choosing to target R, because there are some kids who are showing us they're ready, the thing with R is that it is different. It is different in almost every word. So R at the beginning of the word, like ray or row or rabbit, is different from the R at the end of words, like chair or ear or pour. And then it's also different from the R at the end of words in terms of things like water or ladder. So we want to really think about what we want to try and encourage. And that's where your friendly neighborhood SLP can come in handy and in helping you to narrow down and make those choices. And then I would again always say start with the ones where the children are showing that they're having some success, where it's the easiest for them. Either it's coming naturally some of the time, or you can encourage it with just a little bit of model or prompting. Sorry. Asking a trick question when I'm the one answering seems to be a bit odd, but that does come up quite a bit. There are other later developing sounds too, like the j sound, ch, l. So those ones are other ones that we might be sensitive to, and just, considering what other needs the child has, um, how stipulable they are, which means how easily they can be prompted, and their overall attitude, and just how much frustration or challenge they're able to tolerate, how and how meaningful the word is for them. For some kids, if R is in their name, it makes it a lot more valuable, for example, versus someone who doesn't have as many opportunities to say it. And I already cued myself to move on. Oh, I have had the "why are you always talking about visuals" question. And I get that from staff as well as parents. But there is a reason. Um, we talk about visuals a lot because it is a very important component as a strategy to support almost anything. Having a visual component as well as an auditory component gives kids those different ways to access, process, and retain and recall. So the great thing about visuals also is they're permanent. Whereas when I'm speaking, what I say is very temporary. It comes and goes quickly. Something that's visual will remain. It'll stay. So that gives the child more processing time. Uh, um, and it's more concrete. So often pictures are more representative, or gestures even, or symbols. They tend to connect in a more direct way to the meaning of the word than the auditory. Auditory is very arbitrary. Why the sounds ch, came to represent chair has a long history. And it's not clearly apparent to a child, but if you show them a picture of a chair or even a simple line drawing that's representative of a chair, or even if you could do a gesture that indicates a chair or sitting, that all might make more sense to them. Lots of our students are better as visual learners as well, so it's just more appealing to them. It feels more natural, more comfortable. And I think that, again, just the more ways we can reinforce what we're trying to say and give kids more opportunities to say it back to us, the better it is. See, there was another repeat. I should have figured out how to take out answers when they were done. See, intermittent reinforcement. I don't know when I'm going to get a question I haven't had yet. Probably would have made more sense before we talked about just the R's, but probably the number one question I get is, how do I correct my child? And I think we'll talk about how to help my child in just a little bit, I hope. The correction part, I think, it's not a bad thing. That's natural. That's what we're trying to do. We know they're doing something that isn't the same as adult English, and we want to help them to get that more closer to adult English, whether it's a word, a grammar form, or a sound. However, I think it's really important when we're talking about talking with kids that we respond to the content of what they're saying. If it's not purely just a practice task and it was just that, clear expectation that you say it and I give corrective feedback, if it's coming up in natural conversation, then I think it's really important that we respond to whatever they said first in terms of what the meaning was. Whether it's a question or a comment, acknowledge that you've heard it by answering, by paraphrasing it, saying it back to them, or any other way, building on what they said, even with your actions. But that paraphrasing or recasting what they said can also be a great way to start modeling the correction. So then there's that modeling thing again. I think that's really one of the best things we can do is just keep providing those really good examples of what the target is, and doing it as many times as possible, so that repeat, 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 and using emphasis with our voice, our facial expression, and gesture to make it stand out. Um, I don't usually suggest to parents that they wait for the child to try to, to attempt to correct it all, and certainly not to wait for them to um, be successful and make an accurate um, imitation before moving on, before continuing with the conversation or acting on the request. Because again, I think that takes away from the meaning of what the child was trying to say, and it's going to make them less likely to talk in the future if their words aren't getting any impact. But also, the frustration level for parents is different than it is for an adult who they see less familiarly, like a speech language therapist or a teacher. I know this from my own personal experience. Trying to correct my own daughter's speech language often resulted in her storming from the room or slamming doors or shutting down. Whereas I could make the same cue to a child I work with and get a much different response. So I understand what it's like for parents, and I don't expect you to have to try and make things perfect or make them sound exactly right. But I think drawing attention to that difference and giving them the model of what they were aiming for is really beneficial too, because otherwise kids just keep repeating those same errors without awareness, and they're practicing a pattern that's not effective for them. So it's finding that balance. Um, I hope that makes you feel better, that karma, even though I get the best of your kids, and I really do appreciate that, I did get it from the other side as a parent myself. So this is, I guess, sort of the other side of that question. Um, how can I help with practice at home? Parents are wonderful, and I so appreciate them even asking this question, because I know all the other things you're doing as parents. And it's just noted, I know how different it is as a parent versus a therapist to try and work on these skills. So just your interest and awareness are already so beneficial for your child. And I think, as we've talked about in a few of these other questions, I'm going to go back to modeling. I think being that positive example is one of the most effective ways to practice. You're getting listening practice, so the child is getting that good, strong model in their head of what the sound should be or what the word is, what the skill is. And that is a legitimate and very valuable part of the learning process that sometimes we don't give enough attention to. We go so quickly to producing that we forget about that receptive part, the listening and understanding part. So I think there's great parents have an advantage there, and being able to model in all those different ways, in all the ways that are so special, because they're so functional, and because you have that special relationship with your child. So that modeling, highlighting is something I'll also talk about in the same vein. And it's really just, again, pulling out those things that you want to target and making them stand out. One thing at a time, I usually suggest. So you're picking out a key word or one sound that you're really drawing attention to, and then you're repeating it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. As I have repeated myself throughout this session and across the ones I've done, repetition is one of the most valuable strategies for kids. The other thing I always say, if you can use play, as we talked about just with my attempt to make this more playful, you get engagement, you get novelty, you get more active participation. But it's also the way kids are just geared to learn. Play is what is most meaningful for kids. It is what's most natural. And so any learning through there is going to be more meaningful and natural. Books, I consider part of that, but that might seem a little less natural to some uh, parents or kids because we often think of print and reading as that skill that develops later. But I think sharing books and making books an interactive time is something that is a really lovely time. Many families already have that book sharing time as part of their routines. And there's just nothing you can't really find, no skill you couldn't find in a book, or you couldn't find a book. You can find a book to address any need just about. And in fact, I've done a whole spiel on this if you want to go back and look at some of the other information from past presentations. When you're doing practice at home, I think being intentional is also important. I think that's something I've repeated through all the sessions I've done as well. So that can just involve a little bit of planning. And I'm just gonna show briefly uh, that idea of planning. And will provide a better quality example of this. I didn't realize till too late my formatting's a little off here. But the idea is if you're picking, this is a sound practice example, but it could be for language as well. You're picking that target. You're thinking of what particular words you're going to try and emphasize. You're looking at when. So picking, just having that little bit of extra awareness, that a little bit of extra intention. Sorry about that. I don't think you were seeing what I was seeing. Sorry, starting again. There we go. The idea that you pick your sound, you pick your time, your words, but you pick your times. Families are so busy. There's so much going on at any given time. Having that little bit of pre-thought into, oh, when would this fit in better? When can I reasonably expect myself to do this? And being fair to yourself and not putting an expectation on a time that is just already overloaded with so many other expectations. So picking those times and then thinking, just sit down here, of some of the strategies. Like, okay, well, what things can I do to help with that corrective feedback? What gestures can I do? I pre-filled this in with those strategies that we've already talked about in terms of being slow and being emphatic. If you are a family that thinks it is reasonable in terms of your time and your other demands, if you think that it's something your child would enjoy and you would enjoy, you can look at that idea of a structured practice activity. So something that's not just working into something that's naturally occurring, but something that is dedicated time for practice. But I'm still suggesting making it something playful with some ideas down there. I know my all of my other colleagues have given presentations on ways to have speech and language activities at home. And I also as well shared some of my favorites and some of the reasons why and how I do them in the presentation called My Favorite Things. So there are some resources available for you on the parent portal, but also we have you have your own creativity and you have your own child's interests to take into consideration, and then just knowing to set the stage to really, if it is going to be a dedicated practice time, how do we let the child know when it's beginning and ending? How do we reduce the distractions in the room? How do we make this activity motivating for the child? And just putting again, that little bit of pre-planning in is one more thing I guess I'm asking of parents, I'm putting on parents to do, but it hopefully will pay off in terms of making it less effortful and making it more positive when you do take those times to incorporate speech and language into your home life. All right. I found my wheel again. I think we covered just about everything on there. I don't know if we'll get to all my other uh, games, but I do want to make sure that I leave you with some of that content. Uh, excuse me. Sorry. I'm still working on getting my voice back. Um, I'll just quickly go through some of those definitions, those key terms that come up a lot, but that aren't always as clear as I think they are. Intelligibility is one that I use a lot. It is not to be confused with intelligence, which is an entirely separate thing. When I talk about intelligibility or any of my other speech language colleagues, if you read it in a document, intelligibility refers to how clearly someone's speech can be understood. So again, there's some relativity there. We don't expect a 3-year-old child to be as clear as a adult. And we know that it can vary with situations, but we're looking at overall how much of that speech can be understood. And then we'll look at some of those factors too, like, do we need context to understand, or could it be something kind of out of the blue and it's still clear? Another word that comes up a lot is jargon. Jargon refers to strings of sounds that are speech-like, but are really more nonsense words. Uh, these can come up in terms of sometimes kids when they're learning speech, but don't have it all mastered, putting that really good effort in, but we get a little bit of that garbled, almost, the Charlie Brown teacher kind of speak, or just strings of nonsense words. They've got intonation. They might be close to word forms, but they don't really have that exact meaning. And we also often see that with kids who are developing language differently, such as with autism spectrum disorder or other social communication delays, where you get those strings of nonsense words that the child has intention behind, but there aren't actual specific clear words that you can determine in that string. Generalization just means when we're looking at learning a skill, we do tend to get it first in something that's a little bit less natural, more structured, often one-on-one or possibly in a small group, with some context supports around it. Kids know this is a practice time. We want to generalize. We want them to be able to do it not just with the therapist, but with all the people in the room. We want them to be able to do it not just when they're sitting and doing one structured or semi-structured activity, but to do it in their natural conversation. We want to be able to do it at the playground, the hockey rink, the classroom, in their own home. So that's generalizing, being able to do it in all the contexts with all the people all the time. And that is our long-term goal, always with speech language therapy. We don't start there, of course, so we start in those more scaffolded steps and step our way up. Part of that progression is when we look at whether something's spontaneous versus perhaps imitated or prompted. So spontaneous means the kid's doing it independently. They're doing it on their own without any models, any examples, or without any cues. Imitated would mean they'd have that model. Prompted, maybe you're giving a gesture or verbal cue. And sometimes we'll talk about delayed imitation too, where we're giving a prompt, but it's not, or we're giving a model, but then we're putting something else in there too. So it's not just a straight back and forth echoing. Just couple other quick contrasts. I think we've covered most of the rest. Quick thing on generalization, though. Desiree Brown did a whole presentation on that you can find on the parent portal as well with some related resources. Phonology is a term we'll use when we're thinking of speech sounds in particular. So it's patterns of speech sounds. Related words might be articulation. They're just slightly different ways of looking at how we're producing speech sounds. And then also motor speech, which again is looking at sounds, but looking at how the coordination and sequencing of sounds. And you can take a slightly different approach in terms of how you're choosing targets and the kind of practice you're doing, whether you're looking at phonology, motor speech learning, speech motor learning, or articulation. Often there's a bit of overlap. Kids won't be purely just, presenting with a phonological delay or just with a motor speech learning delay or just with a dysarthria or a weakness. Oh, there's another good word. Often there's elements of all of those. And so looking at the patterns of success and in productions, looking at the response to treatment can be important in continuing to refine the best approach for a kiddo. And my last and most quick thing is the acronyms. Individual program plan is something you'll see a lot. IPP, individual program plan. That is what we use as our guiding document for a child's treatment and learning through the year. So that is a multidisciplinary document where the teacher and all the clinicians are involved. It's also a document that is important in our accountability to the school division and to Alberta Education. And what it breaks down is what we're going to focus on for the year for the child and how we're going to do it, and then a way to evaluate the progress. We probably have had one of those meetings already. I'm going to save that one. It really goes with SLP, which is me, which you probably figured out is speech and language pathologist. But I often use the term, the SL abbreviation or an acronym. I put it in emails and in documents, and that's to indicate that what I'm talking about relates to speech and language. And I took that for granted until just recently, when a very close family member said, "What did that mean?" And I thought, geez, I got to remember to explain my acronyms. All right. Two more. We've done that one. AAC is alternative and augmentative communication. And that can be everything from low tech or even no tech to high tech. And what it is methods and tools that can help to support individuals who are limited in their verbal or print language. And a lot of it relates to those visuals. So often we're using something with pictures or symbols. And then maybe there's also an auditory component and a voice output component when we're looking more at that high tech end. But it could include things as simple as signs or the visuals we use to support the schedules. It could be as complex as a speaking system on a device such as an iPad. For every kid, their needs will be different, and they will evolve as they grow and as they progress. Oh, good. And the perfect one to end on is program unit funding. A word that we use a lot, but doesn't necessarily, even when you know what PUF stands for, program unit funding, it's not always clear what that is. But what that refers to is the funding that we can qualify children for. Why we do the assessments when we look at kids' level of needs when we talked about needs, and those kids with the severe needs would qualify for the program unit funding, which is a way that we support the programming. And particularly for those kids with greater needs, they typically require a greater level of support, more complex supports. And so there is that funding piece attached to it. We could do a whole thing on some of those other elements, such as coding, or some of the other vocabulary things that come up often in IPPs related to specific goals. I know some of the things related to literacy or numeracy we had lots of questions about. Things related to grammar I probably could do a whole spiel about. And if you are interested in any of those things, please let me know. And we can continue to provide these type of resources through the parent portal, either through talks such as this or other print materials. And so I would say for the purposes of recording, we could end, and then I would take questions. But since I've already kind of asked and answered my own questions here on my own, I think that is everything. I really appreciate anyone who's taken the time to listen. Thank you so much.